Yes, there they are. Back in 2019, I had the opportunity to go on a trip to Israel, and when I came back, I spoke with both Paul and Tim, and I mentioned to both of them, you know what would really be cool is if we as a school would go to Israel, and we'd have the opportunity to take our students with us. And I didn't hear anything for several weeks, and finally I think Tim called me back in there and he said, here's what we're thinking. And so this last summer, we had the opportunity, we took our inaugural trip to Israel. You'll see Gibby and Donna and all the rest of them up there. Hey, if you went, would you stand I know there are a bunch of them back here. Would you stand if you went with us on this trip? Okay, and that's only a few because we've got several. Who else? Tyrus, and there's Miss Donna, Rex, Greg and Asta. Who else am I missing? Becca, my wife, Becca. Don't want to miss her. Richard's here. So, yeah. So, anyway, just a really good group to go and have that opportunity to see. I've asked several, not several, but a few of those who have been. I've asked Garrett to come and to speak a little bit from the perspective of a student, graduate that just went. He drove over here 3+ hours to get here last night and stayed with me. And then Gibby's going to speak for a little bit, and then I'll make a short kind of a presentation with some of the slides. And then Tim will talk at the end a little bit about some of the finances that go into this to make this trip possible. Okay, Garrett?
So honestly, move that up a little bit. Honestly, when Kevin did this last year, I had no intention of going, honestly. And I think the money was a big thing for me, and also I had never flown before, and I think my only experience was like 15 minutes in a crop duster. And so flying halfway across the world was not very appealing to me. I just talked to Kevin. I said, Kevin, I'm not really interested in going, and Kevin said, no, I'm going to put you down. Try to get the money down to go together. And so I struggled to get that money together. And I think it came together the week before the deadline. And so I had the privilege of going. Right off the bat, the first thing our tour guide said when we got there was, he said, welcome home. And I thought that was just kind of weird. You know, we had flown an 11-hour flight being squished together. I'm tired. This isn't home. And he said, in a way, this land is home to you because you have studied this land. You know this land, almost like you know your own land. And to be honest with you, it kind of felt like home to some degree. Going to Mexico earlier in the year kind of felt like a foreigner in a foreign place. But I didn't feel like a foreigner in a foreign place on this trip. I felt like I honestly had been there before from knowing it and studying it, especially it's been in the past 2 years there. The flight was rough, just saying. The flight was very, very rough. But some of the things that stuck out with me was going to walk the Temple Mount, where the temple used to be, and all the things that had happened on there. That's the same place where Abraham went to go sacrifice Isaac, and just being there and visualizing the things that went on at that place, that stuck out to me. I think and I think Kevin's going to talk here in a minute, of going places where Jesus was. And that just puts it in a whole broader perspective than just reading it in a text. One of the highlights for me was sitting in the middle of the Sea of Galilee and singing "The Master is a Tempest is Raging." That was, man. I think that the biggest thing that this trip has done for me is it has made me, I guess, connect in a way to the Gospels that I didn't have before. And I can read the Gospels and I can say, hey, I know where that is. I know what it looks like there now. And there's a connection to that in a way. And I can read maps now that I've been there and I'm familiar with the place. But it was a very, very good trip. I was very, very tired. It took a while to recover from that. But if you have the chance to go on this trip, I highly suggest it, especially after spending the past 2 or 3 years studying these texts, studying the place. It just gives you a different perspective when you've been there, actually. So yeah, don't think the money is too big of a thing to overcome. Pray to God about it. Don't be afraid to talk about it. What I have found is there are a lot of people that will get behind this just to see pictures. There are a lot of people that will say, hey, we'll help you out if you'll show us some pictures. and that I have about 3 or 4 congregations lined up to go give pictures to here in a little while. But yeah, I don't think the money is too much to overcome. I think that's all I have to say about it.
I want to assure you that Garrett did change his shirt since the trip. Wow, I all my life I've, having grown up in the church and Christian school, I've studied the Holy Land. It was always a map representation or pictures that someone else had taken or an experience they had had and was trying to communicate. But it wasn't until I deboarded that plane and put my feet on the Holy Land that it became a real place for me. Before that, I believed that it is what it is, but there's nothing like walking those grounds and seeing the sights that we saw. Kevin had mentioned to me, talk a little bit about the Sea of Galilee, but how can you do that? I've working with Trek all these years and climbing mountains, I've learned to get to the headwaters of a lot of different rivers and to stand at the headwaters of the Jordan River, see where the water comes out of the ground in millions of cubic feet and flows southward toward the Sea of Galilee. Now, I will say the fisherman in me was a little envious. As we walked along the river there, I spotted a great supply of rainbow trout. I was thinking, man, if I just had a fly rod here. A lot of surprising things, but as that water comes down, it was breathtaking to see the Sea of Galilee for the first time. I'm not sure what I envisioned. I envisioned a large lake, and I've been on many of them here in the United States, but it's a pretty good sized body of water. But I think what was humbling was I was standing on the shoreline where Andrew came running and says, "Brother Simon, come and see, I've found the Lord." It was a place where Matthew was called from his tax collecting to follow Jesus. And James and John, Boanerges, the sons of thunder, became Jesus' disciples. I thought about so many things. And of course, as we came to the Sea of Galilee, we had just left the museum where they had discovered the Jesus boat, the remains of a boat that dated back to the time of Christ and most closely resembled the fishing vessels that Jesus and his disciples sailed across the lake in. And quite honestly, we went on somewhat of a tourist excursion. The boat was much larger and more stable. It was a windy day, and there were small white caps. And I was thinking to myself, I'm not sure I'd want to be out on this open body of water when it really did get nasty. And I think of how many times that occurred. But to look at that water and see it as it flows down the Jordan River, ultimately to what we know as the Dead Sea, at the urging of Kevin, to swap over to a swimsuit and get out in that water and have the most weirdest experience I've ever had in my life of floating without having to try to float. And I'm glad I did that. But from there on down into the hot country and the area of the wilderness where Jesus was tempted by the devil, and the fortress of Masada at 115 degrees when we were there. The Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls, that area where those were discovered. Just a wonderful experience to see it with your own eyes will change the way you study the text here. You'll develop a tremendous appreciation for all that's there. So if, in the future, be thinking about it. It's a worthwhile journey.
I think you can tell from both of the guys who have spoken here, it will change the way you see things. It'll change the way that you read the text. It'll change the way you speak and preach to others as well. Well, as you see in the picture there, this is the Temple Mount. You see the Golden Dome behind it. That was where the temple was built for all of those years. And then now the Dome of the Rock, again, what it's called. That rock is believed to be the rock where Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac. And so there's so much history, rich history with all of that. And I wanted just to walk you through, we've got a few minutes here, I wanted just to walk you through a couple of things that you think about Jesus starting in the city of Nazareth, maybe 300 or 400 people, and if you went through Nazareth today, you would see this big metropolis, the boyhood town of Jesus. It's somewhere around 77,000 now, I think they said, big college town and everything else. But a couple of things that show up in this, even there at Mount Precipice, just at the top or at the edge of Nazareth. You remember there in Luke chapter 4 where it says he came to Nazareth where he'd been brought up, and he entered into the synagogue and he had that big long conversation, and it says the synagogue was filled with rage because Jesus didn't say anything really nice about them. He said, you know that he spent a lot of time talking to other people, and so he's not honored even in his own hometown. Well, standing at the top of Mount Precipice, you could certainly see that would certainly do the job if they were going to push him off. We did see the Sea of Galilee. And again, there are different pictures in your own mind, I'm sure, as you see that. But they were casting their nets into the lake there in Matthew chapter 4 and verse 18, where Peter and Andrew and James and John, and as Gibby mentioned, the Jesus boat. This is the remains of that. We got to see that. It was discovered back in 1986 during a drought year, and we had the opportunity to kind of spend a little bit of time looking at it. It's 27 feet long and about 7.5 feet wide. Took them over 2 weeks just to be able to take all the mud from around it, but when they put it all back together, it's just kind of a cool picture in your mind then, again, of being able to see this would be something like the vessel maybe that Peter and Andrew and James and John, and of course, it isn't the boat, it's what Jesus said, from now on you will be catching men, and that's the significant part of it. Gibby also mentioned there on the Sea of Galilee, you'll see on the side, that's the Noah boat. That is not the ark, just in case you're wondering. But so many different things that took place there on the Sea of Galilee, the feeding of the 5,000 and the storm that comes up, and after this great catch of fish there in Luke chapter 5. So many different pictures. When the storm is raging, they ask him, Jesus, don't you care if we're going to drown? And he rebukes the wind and the waves, and it becomes completely calm. And as Gibby was talking, the day we were out there, it was not calm. But it wasn't a raging storm either at that particular point. But hearing Jesus, you can be on a boat like this, and you can imagine this is what it would have been like, and this is what you would have seen with the water all around. You also have the opportunity to stand or to sit, as we did there on the Mount of the Beatitudes, and look across the Sea of Galilee there in the distance. And we got to do that and read Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7, and hear it in a context of not in a sermon with pews and things like that around you, but actually sitting there and looking across the water. And that was one of those days. I don't think it was 115, but it was probably 105 or so in there as we listened to that. That's the traditional spot. Also, the town of Capernaum. There in Matthew chapter 4, it says that they left Nazareth and he came and he settled in Capernaum, which is by the sea. Later on in chapter 9 and verse 1, he came to his own hometown. There is a church that sits on stilts. You can kind of see the concrete stilts, and this is underneath it, because they have excavated and they found what they believe to be Peter's house. And on top of this is this great, big, huge Catholic church that has glass in the bottom of it where you can look through and you can see what's going on underneath it. But again, Peter's house, just not very far from this particular area. You'll see the synagogue. You'll see the dark stones at the very bottom of that. Those dark stones were the first century foundation of the synagogue in Capernaum. We know Jesus was there. The white on top of it would have come from about the 4th century, a little bit later on, Roman times. So many different things that take place in Capernaum. And I don't have time to talk about all of those. These are just real quick. But the 4 fishermen who are called, the healing of the centurion's servant, Matthew, as Gibby mentioned right there in the tax booth, is called, come follow me. the healing of the nobleman's son who wasn't even there, but it happened in Capernaum or close to Capernaum. The paralytic is healed when he's let down through the roof. Somebody's house had to be re-roofed after that because they let him down and Jesus healed him. Jairus' daughter raised from the dead. The pronouncement of the woes on Chorazin and Bethsaida and Capernaum. You remember Jesus saying, if the miracles that had been done here had been done in Sodom and Gomorrah, they would have repented. But these things have happened in your midst, and you still won't believe any of the things that take place. We went up north to Caesarea Philippi. You remember what happens in Caesarea Philippi, right? This is the Temple of Pan. Further north, the grotto, the cave that is up there. You also have so many different things that take place. This is where Jesus asked, who do people say that I am? And they began to talk through that, and they began to ask, or they began to converse with him. Some people say that you're John the Baptist or a prophet or something like that. And then he asked that really important question in Matthew 16, doesn't he? But who do you say that I am? And that's where Peter says, you're the Christ, you're the Son of God. The thing that's so cool about this is not just what Jesus said, but where he said it, because he says it in front of this grotto, which is called the gates of hell. One of four places, and I think Yossi told us one of four places that in the world where they actually talk about being the gates of hell. He said it in front of this. And the reason that he said it in front of this is because he says about the kingdom and the gates of hell, the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. Death isn't going to keep my kingdom from coming in all of its power. That's what Jesus had to say. We had the opportunity to go to the Shrine of the Scroll, and out in front of that is this large model of Jerusalem in the first century. And you can see a lot of different things. You see the square there kind of in the middle with the Temple Mount and everything that was around it. It gave us, again, a better picture. It's not just a map. It's not just a picture in the back of your Bible, but something that you can kind of visualize with that. The walls of Jerusalem, we got to walk around those, especially there on the western and on the southern side, and saw those stones that had been broken and pushed over. And of course, you can't help but think about what he says. Remember in Matthew chapter 24, do you see all these stones? Do you see these things? Not one stone is going to be left on the other. We got to go to what is probably the most famous wall, called the Wailing Wall, and got to look around and watch as these people put their little prayers on pieces of paper and shoved them in the cracks of these big stones that were down on the bottom. They're still praying for Messiah to come. Still praying for Messiah to come. Not understanding, not knowing, or not accepting. That's probably the better term. Not accepting the fact that Jesus is Messiah and was Messiah, and you didn't believe in him at that particular point and still are waiting for something else. One of the pictures I didn't get it posted right here, but almost everybody in this group went down Hezekiah's Tunnel. And Hezekiah's Tunnel is a place, if you go back into the Old Testament, 700 years before Jesus, is still there. Still has water running into it. Still brings water into what empties into the pool of Siloam. It's still there. 2,700 years ago, they did it without any kind of great tools and all of the modern architecture and things like that, but they brought fresh water into the city of Jerusalem as well. I know I'm running through it really quickly here just because of time and the things that we have to go through. Here's a picture or a model of Jesus the last week of his life as he laments over Jerusalem. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I long to bring you to myself as a hen brings her chicks to himself, and you would not. You didn't want it. You didn't want to come to me. I wanted that more than anything else in his lament. And he preaches those three parables, the parable of the fig tree, as he curses it, and then he comes back and they ask him about it. Well, tell me about this. It's not about trees. It's about the people there in Jerusalem and Judea who would not accept him. The parable of the 10 virgins is a parable to be ready and to be on the alert, because a day is coming when the bridegroom is coming, and you don't know when that day is coming, and so you have to be ready all the time. And then the parable of the talents, when he comes in and he's going to settle accounts. That day is still coming. It came for Jerusalem, and it will come for every country, and it will come for the world one day as well, in talking about Christ's return. That particular picture is from the Garden of Gethsemane. And you know at the end of his life where he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus goes there. It's right there at the side. It's looking across the Kidron Valley over to the Temple Mount. And that bridge that you can just barely see to right over here, this bridge leads to a doorway, an exit that comes out. He would have seen them coming with the torches and everything else, the mob coming for him. He didn't run. He didn't leave. He didn't go somewhere else. And you remember his words, "My Father, if it be your will, let there be another way, any other way, but not my will, but thine be done." And you have his resolve to do God's will, and you have Judas coming and leading this mob of people. And the most godless trial that ever took place in history took place in this particular spot that is known now as Caiaphas's house, and the place where we stood for a while and actually spent a little bit of time and walked through some of the caves that were down underneath. We had that opportunity to see the ruins there of Caiaphas's house as well. So many more things. Again, I'm running through it, I know, really quickly here, but just for a matter of time, you have the Via Dolorosa, the way of pain or the way of passion, where Jesus was taken, where after the trial he was on his way and he goes from Pilate to the cross, carrying his own cross, where he has to take stumbles at a couple of different places. The place that they believe Calvary actually to have been is covered by a great big huge church. And so you can't see it and you can't tell it or anything else. This is called Gordon's Calvary. The place of the skull looks a lot more like it, and we had the opportunity to look at it as well. But it gives you at least a little bit of a picture maybe of what that would have been like. And after the cross and after the crucifixion, this is what's called the garden tomb. And it's not the garden tomb, but it is a garden tomb that they believe to be from the first century. And in this garden tomb, you have the opportunity to see something of what might have looked like the burial place of Jesus. In John chapter 20 and verse 41, it says, "In the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden was a new tomb that had never been used." And we had the opportunity not just to look at it, but to go in and to feel just the kind of the hairs on the back of your neck stand up when you go into some place like that and thinking of what that might have been like. Even the place in John 19, verse 40, it says, "They bound the body of Jesus, as is the custom of the Jews, and they laid him there." And we had the chance to look inside this particular tomb, as did Peter and John as they ran to the tomb. On top of that, there was this large rock that was there. Again, all of the stuff that we think about and all the stuff we talk about with Jesus. In Luke chapter 24, they found that stone rolled away from the tomb. I say all of those things just to give you a little bit of a picture of what we had the opportunity to experience while we were there. We got to walk in the footprints of Jesus. We got to sit in some of the places where he would have entered and exited out of the city of Jerusalem. We got to stand and sit there where the pictures were taken as well of some places where Jesus would have gone, his ascension and everything else that took place. All of these things are helpful to us. It's helpful to our eyes. It helps us understand the things that we've been reading aren't just story. They're not just, happened in a far, far away place and a long, long time ago. These are real places, and it's real events, and it's real history, and we can really believe all those things are true as well. I'm so grateful to the guys, to the people who went with us. Jet was our best traveler. She was just such fun to be with. We had a lot of fun. And everybody else, guys, thank you for blessing all of us in that. I really do believe it will bless your life as well. I've asked Tim to come just for a moment here at the end to give us a little bit of an idea about some of the finances, because Garrett mentioned that. It's not an inexpensive trip, but it is a worthwhile trip.
Good morning. It indeed was the trip of a lifetime in many ways. To be able to walk in the places where we know Jesus walked, to stand in the places where archaeologically we understand that he stood or had to have stood, and to be able to put geography and archaeology along with what we have learned in our studies. One of the reasons that we have begun to have these trips is to give you an opportunity that many people do not have. Many preachers, ministers, servants of Christ never have this opportunity in their ministry, or they save up for years and years, or they wait into their retirement years in order to do it. And what a blessing it is to be able to experience this now, and to be able to take what you study here for 2 or 3 years and then to be able to walk it and experience it, and to have that shape the way in which you teach your classes, the way in which you preach your sermons, and to have that color the way that you present the material that you have learned about in God's Word. We just really think that that's going to make you a better servant of Christ. And that's the whole reason that we offer this. And so we really, really hope that you will take advantage of this opportunity, because it is an opportunity, not just to be able to go over and to walk and to be in those places, but from also a financial standpoint, it is an opportunity for you. Because if you take this trip as your graduation trip, then for you, it is greatly discounted. And so what we have worked out with this first group, and as is our intent going forward, you are able to do this at a greatly reduced rate. And so what we did with the first group, and we intend to do going forward, is we encourage everybody, as soon as they enter into their studies here, to begin setting aside some funds for this trip. So, for example, if an incoming student who just began in August were to set aside $100 a month, and I know that in some cases $100 is an important part of our budget being here at SIBI. But if, as you were told earlier, if we will involve our supporters, if we will talk to them and tell them what this is about, I can assure you that they will want to be involved, and they will recognize the academic advantage of this, as well as the ongoing ministry advantage of this. And they will want to help out. But if you would set aside $100 a month and give that at the finance office, that will be held for when we go on this trip. So if you're here for 2 years, that means that in that span, you will have set aside $2,200, say from August till May, in your studies in 2 years. When we go on the trip, we give you, from that $2,200, we give you back $500, which you are going to use while you are in Israel to cover incidentals and meals and other things while you are there. So in actuality, the trip itself will cost you, in terms of setting aside, it's going to cost you $1,700 of a $4,000 trip. And we will take on the rest of that cost as an institute. And so it is highly beneficial for you to decide from the very beginning to take part in this. And of course, if you're a 3-year student, you can do the same thing by setting aside, say, $80 a month, or $75 a month or something similar to that and wind up in the same place. But we want you to go on this trip, and we will be working with you so that you can go on this trip. And Kevin worked with those who did not intend to go on this trip and helped them to find the finances to do so. We want you. We earnestly want you to benefit from this. This trip is for you. And so please, please decide today that you are going to commit yourself to this trip. You will never, ever regret it.